Hello, my name is Ollie Thomas. I'm founder and managing partner here at Expedition Growth Capital. We're a software specialist, bootstrap specialist growth equity firm with offices in London, where we're headquartered, and Boston, North America. We invest in the most ambitious bootstrap companies being built across Europe. And today I'm delighted to be joined by the founder of one of those companies, Tom Hacquoil from Pinpoint. Tom, great to be with you today.
Thanks for having me on. It's nice to be here.
Tom, as you may know, about 2/3 of the companies we invest in here at Expedition are meaningfully in the US at the time when we invest. And typically they are getting pulled into that market by great product market fit, and then working out how best to resource the opportunity whilst also managing a lot of growth in their home markets. So really appreciate you taking the time to share your perspectives from your US growth journey. Before we turn to the US, Tom, could you just level set? What is Pinpoint? Maybe give everyone a sense of size and growth of the business today.
Sure. Yeah. So Pinpoint is a applicant tracking system, sort of a recruitment CRM for those not close to the HCM space. We work with organizations of all shapes and sizes across pretty much every industry, but sort of sweet spot for us is the 500 to 10,000 headcount organizations doing meaningful volumes of recruiting. We're split pretty equally nowadays between the UK, which is our sort of home market, if you will, and the US, about 50-50 revenue split across those. Business today is sort of low tens of millions of ARR, growing about 50% year on year. There's about 85 of us in the team now. And yeah, sort of bootstrapped, but both historically and today, other than a great partnership with the folks at Expedition.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. So at what stage did you enter the US, and maybe just touch on any particular surprises, positive or negative, from that expansion?
Yeah. So look, for us, I think we sort of saw the US market as pretty integral to the future of the business from day one. I think we have aspirations to build a very large organization. We didn't really see a clear path to that unless we could prove that we could kind of win market share in the US and beat the US incumbents, because those are sort of the folks everyone turns to and respects naturally in the industry. So we sort of set out to do well in the US from day one. I think surprises many. I think one is I'd sort of expected that the US market buyer would operate quite similarly to the folks we speak to in the UK. I'd say the biggest observation I'd give you out of the gate is, on average, the US buyer seems to have a great deal more propensity to research and to dig deeper before they contact the sales org. So in the UK, people will kind of book a demo without really having ever dug into what it is we do, and spend a lot of time kind of holding hands and taking folks on a journey. In the US, it's much more common that folks have read analyst reports, they've Googled, they've watched demo videos, they've kind of engaged with content. Some even have speculatively spoken to other customers they've seen us work with before reaching out, and they tend to have a kind of much clearer idea of what success looks like for them, which is really helpful, bluntly. And it means the sales cycle we see in the US tends to run a little quicker. I think the other thing I'd say is, I think we sort of saw the US as one homogenous market. I think it's kind of pitched that way often for folks in Europe, where we're used to multilingual and quite fragmented cultural differences. I think those things, apart from the multilingual, exist too in the US, right? And the way that middle America buys is distinctly different from the way coastal America buys, in my experience. And there's kind of pockets of industries that I think we found easy to crack as an international business, and in other pockets we found quite difficult. And so those are kind of probably two early surprises out of the gate.
Fascinating. Thanks, Tom. And I'd really be interested to get your perspectives on ICP. What's been your approach to ICP, verticals, geos, firmographics versus more opportunistic selling, and how's that influenced your decisions to operate, whether it be as a remote team or a sales hub model, or how you've oriented yourselves in the US?
Yeah, to be honest, I think a lot of those decisions kind of got made for us, whether they were right or wrong, right? I think as a bootstrap business, we've never had like huge chunks of capital to risk to go and say, hey, we're going to open a sales center in Arizona or in Boston or in whatever we sort of decided our ICP market was. I think much the same as we think about go-to-market strategy, marketing, targeting, etc. I think we intentionally have always cast a pretty broad net. I think we're fortunate that our product isn't vertical focused, and we're quite horizontal in the folks we can serve. And we sort of bluntly kind of beggars couldn't be choosers in our earliest days, and we took business that came our way. And I think what we identified is that, well, really two things in sort of almost a bit of a Venn diagram, right? On the one side, we really learned that our product resonated hugely well with multinational organizations recruiting both in the US and elsewhere, or in the UK and elsewhere, and organizations that recruit both desk and deskless, or sort of white and blue collar, crudely, workforces. We think our platform is really good for those. I think secondly, we learned that certain industries have a propensity to take a risk on a young or a new supplier and are kind of early adopters, and certain industries really aren't. And so we sort of then tried to find that sweet spot in that Venn diagram of folks where the product really resonated, but they also had a high propensity to buy from a business that wasn't near them and didn't know them, and so on. And so that's kind of evolved quite organically, has served us well. I think we're quite insulated then from particular downturns in certain industries, right? Rather than, so we work very closely with retail, hospitality, leisure, etc. Those folks have been hit quite hard by tariffs of late. And so fortunately, that's not the only sector we serve well. And we've kind of managed to move our focus around us as markets have dictated we should.
Got it. And then on the organization side, you elected to operate remotely across the US. Is that right? And how do you navigate culture and sort of team cohesion in that regard?
Yeah, again, to be honest, another one of the things that I think was just made for us. I think so. For context, we're headquartered in Jersey and the Channel Islands, which is a wonderful place to live, but where the pool of talent is essentially zero. We are the largest software business by some margin in Jersey, and we're still quite small. So I give you that context because remote was always ingrained in the way we thought, because we were always going to have to recruit a diverse workforce in a bunch of different localities. And we're fortunate to have folks spread across the UK and the US. And I think when we look to the US, be taken seriously with the sort of organizations that we work with today, we need round-the-clock support, we need localized time zone coverage, we need folks on the ground in the sales and marketing teams in those arenas. And so very early, we needed folks everywhere from the West Coast to the East. And we've just never been able to operate at a size where we've sort of had, let's put 10 bodies in Boston and put an office around them. It's just not been a choice, to be honest. And I think we've then just lent into that and understood, we are high documentation culture. We know how to work asynchronously. We are incredibly high trust and incredibly transparent, so that everybody feels like they're kind of equipped with the context they need to do their work. And then, to be honest, the money we save on office spaces and sort of all the other tertiary costs of that sort of stuff, we then reinvest into travel, and we make sure the team spend plenty of time face to face together when they can. I don't think anybody can profess to getting remote perfectly correct, but I think it's been easier for us because we've sort of been that way since day one, rather than trying to retrofit that into an established culture.
Yeah, got it. And so I wanted to pull a thread on something you said around buyers being a little more visionary, maybe, and taking risk on the best product rather than the biggest brand. Interested in that journey. I think here in the UK, you are assuming that position increasingly as sort of a reference leader in your segment. You somehow reached that place of you won't get fired for buying Pinpoint because so many other great companies are buying Pinpoint. What does that journey look like in the US? You're currently in the zone where I guess people are buying you as the best solution rather than the biggest brand in the US. Do you think one day you get to that point, or is there just such a depth to that market that you can sort of achieve your growth ambitions in a more visionary adopter market rather than the, I guess, conservative mainstream?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think, just to echo that sort of summary, today in the UK, we are the largest ATS by revenue, is my understanding. And we have seen that tide turn, right? The UK is a very conservative market. The questions we would get asked really over the past 5 or 6 years has been, what other brands do we know that use you? Can we see your accounts? How do we know you're still going to be here in 2 years? Blah, blah, blah. We've very much overcome those challenges now. We are now perceived as the safe bet. And I think that's been incredibly valuable. And we've really seen that uptick in sort of marketing efficiency and sales cycle reductions over the past year or so. And we think that trend will long continue. Will that be the case for us in the US? Sadly, probably not. I think we're quite pragmatic about that. We think the US market's literally 50 times the size of the UK market for us in terms of revenue opportunity. And all of the kind of global incumbents, from the Workdays of the world at the enterprise level down to the sort of iSIMs and the Greenhouse and everybody beneath them, these folks have raised hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. They've been alive twice or 5 times as long as we have. We don't expect we'll ever become the obvious choice. I think that's fine, though. I think the value of operating in such a sort of depth of market really outweighs the necessity to be the obvious choice. I think what we've tried to do is lean in where we can to the things that matter for that audience. And so whilst we didn't necessarily have teams in highly kind of densely constructed fashions in, say, New York, early days, we won some great business in New York. We won New York Public Library in year 2 of the business, for example. And whilst that wasn't a ginormous account on a revenue basis, it's been instrumental to our growth in the market because it's a very well-known and well-regarded consumer brand where there's huge volume. And so we doubled down into case studies and references and other things there and built a whole kind of marketing play around that. And that meant we now have 50 or 60 customers in New York that we can reference. And we sort of take that and grow with it. We also had some early successes on the West Coast. And so I think like it's a difficult one. I think we've kind of lent into how can we position it as an advantage? And we obviously now for those organizations look at, hey, actually, we think we're better internationally than the greenhouses and the ISIMs who focus very strongly on the US home market for these folks. And so can we flip that perceived disadvantage into an advantage? And I think that's also worked well. So I think you just got to box clever a little bit. And I think do what you can to be scrappy to find those early reference logos because they make a huge, huge difference.
Yes. Thanks. Great. So what about moving up market? You've made such impressive progress. I think just before we got started here, we're talking about some really exciting enterprises that are coming onto the platform. Has that been easier to do in the US or the UK? What's the balance there?
I think it's been much easier for us in the US. And I think if you look at the distribution of our largest accounts, the vast majority of them are based in the US. And I think that sort of comes back to that early piece we talked about, right? I think UK is a very conservative market, as is Europe, in my experience, a very conservative market. People buy localized solutions. They don't want to take risks. It's the nobody gets fired for buying IBM that you sort of alluded to earlier. I think in the US, not always, but many of the early adopters of the products, even today at the enterprise level, are folks who kind of make a career bet on Pinpoint. And they're sort of TA folks or sort of people leaders in large organizations, and they see bringing Pinpoint into a legacy organization or an enterprise business as a real positive mark on their career, right? And they're sort of betting the house on us, and we take that responsibility very seriously, but they're willing to do it, right? And they see innovation as the thing to celebrate rather than sort of risk aversion. In the UK, I think there's a lot of fear from buyers that they're going to try and implement a new market solution. It's not going to go well and it's a black mark they'll never recover from. And I think shifting that perception of risk has been a big part of how we've evolved our own approach to go to market over the past few years. But no, I'd say that the US is much, much easier to grow into that sort of enterprise segment. Frankly, there's just also a lot more of those organizations. And it's a much, much easier market, even if your win rate is early, very low. You can afford to make a few mistakes and learn. Whereas actually we looked at the UK and we said, maybe there's 4,000 or 5,000 total organizations in that mid-market and enterprise cohort. Bluntly, we can't afford to cock up those relationships. We can't misstep. And actually, maybe I'd rather not speak to them until a few years down the line when we've got more referenceability so they don't rule us out forevermore. And so the market dynamics are different and quite interesting. But yeah, US certainly easier in our experience.
And I guess you gotta have the right talent to address those larger customers in the US. How have you navigated that competing in the talent pool to join a lesser capitalized, lesser branded European player when I'm sure these folks are, they're much more aware of the greenhouses or the smart recruiters of the world?
It's a great question. I think, like, to be honest, there's a couple of factors, right? I think one, on the international piece, I think that's actually not been as much of a hindrance as we'd initially thought it would. I think where I think folks get a bad rap there is often European or UK businesses will scale quite maturely in their home markets and they'll be in the tens of millions of ARR before they even evaluate the US. They'll go and do that and the US will represent a sort of 5% of revenue bet or something. And I think what you see in the talent pool, especially in today's market, kind of macro conditions, is some real risk aversion that is this European business going to decide actually the US is a bit harder than we thought and it's not worth the effort and we'll retrench. And that has actually happened quite a lot in our competitive landscape. And so I think we lent in very heavily early to, hey, half of our team is in the US, half of our revenue is in the US. It is a main market for us on par with our home market. There's no chance that we decide it's not worth the effort, right? And I think that's been a real kind of confidence positioning piece. I think the second piece is US labor is expensive, right? We recognize that. Everybody understands that. We've always known that, and we sort of factored that into our unit economics from day one. So we pay US market rates, which I think is sometimes rare for Europeans entering the market. And I think the second thing is that we've really worked hard to make sure that we've kind of positioned ourselves as the obvious efficient capital choice. I think what used to happen is everybody would go, oh, well, my, Pinpoint's competitors have raised $100 million or $200 million and they're very well capitalized and there's no risk with that. I think obviously a lot of stuff has evolved over the past few years as the market has sort of adjusted and evaluated. And what we see from candidates now is a lot more questions around the underlying financial health of the business and the stability and the path to profitability if it's not already there. And what's the balance sheet look? For us, we're a bootstrapped capital efficient business. We've never done layoffs. We've never had to sort of right size the organization. We're very sensible about how we deploy our cash. That's been really confidence inspiring and actually has helped us attract an incredible pool of talent. So I think market's been in our favor for the past few years and we've sort of cheated a bit, but it's been easier than we thought.
Great. And have you, I'm interested in the leadership model there in the US. Did someone from the home base go out to help develop and lead that market, or have you found trusted leaders in market? How have you managed that?
Yeah, to be honest, we got that a bit wrong. I think we tried to hire leaders in that market early days, and I think what we found was, honestly, we just made a few mishires. Those mishires were prohibitively expensive. We entered that market early, and we're doing single-digit millions and speaking to leaders of teams who expect $400,000 a year or more in compensation, and it's like a very kind of mismatch, right? And so I think we had a few early missteps there where we tried to sort of prematurely bring leadership into the business when it just wasn't ready for it. We've really been fortunate to have great leaders here in the UK in sort of almost all of our functions who are very happy to travel. And we are very frequently in the US. I'm there once every month or two. Our CRO is there once every month or two. We've got lots of travel backwards and forwards. We're also just very tolerant of late evenings. And I think it's been better to have the right cultural champions here doing stuff in the US market than it has been to get the wrong fits in the US trying to solve those problems. I think now the business is larger and more mature and a lot of that sort of procedural stuff has been bedded into the business. We are now starting to lay in local leadership. And I think that's worked better for us because they're sort of taking and running with stuff we've already got. Bluntly, a lot of our leadership have very young families and had very little appetite to relocate to the US. And we've kind of made it work. I'm not sure that's the right decision, though.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I mean, we see it across lots of companies that trying to figure out how do you send in one of your best people from the European market to lead the way there, but then obviously there's a backfilling in the home market. But I think the thread of having culture carriers and culture cohesion, putting that as a priority seems to be a common thread of success. And it sounds like your model has done that fundamentally. And then over time, you're able to get more of that on the ground leadership.
Yeah, I think it's just important to flag that it's just easier for us because we started in the US as much as we were in any other market. I think what I've heard and seen from some of our peers in the landscape, not just in our industry, but sort of in software more broadly, is they'll scale to a level and they'll take a European or UK leader and send them to the US. But those folks often have quite preconceived views of what good looks like. And I think they need to be very happy to relinquish themselves quite quickly of those views because the US market fundamentally operates and works differently. And I think there is some value in our naivety early days and that sort of ability to work remotely, but get really great quality boots on the ground and learn from them worked. I think if we had somebody coming into the US now trying to lead that function, it would be difficult.
Yeah, got it. Okay, great. Well, Tom, interested in what your top 3 tips would be for another bootstrap European company heading into US expansion.
Yeah, I think, okay, so 3 quick fire things. I think, look, be prepared for the competitive nature of the market. I think that sounds really bloody obvious, but the thing I hear most often from European and UK founders entering the market is that they're quite humbled by the depth of the competition and the pace of the market. I think lots of folks in the Europe and UK markets win on account of locality or kind of proximity to their customers rather than on the basis of their product. You have to have a really, really, really compelling product and you have to move quickly. I think the second thing is don't underestimate the localization challenge. Even if you're in the UK and you speak English and English is the natural language of the product, US folks want their dates to look a certain way, and they want Zs, not Ss, and they want people with Texan accents speaking to Texan folks, and so on and so forth. And I think making sure your case studies and your product literature and the language that you use everywhere really reflects the way that the US operates. You need to eliminate any kind of raising of a concern that you don't understand the market you're selling to. And I think even tiny things like the way you position something or the language you use really, really do that. And we learned that lesson early. And then I think the third one, and probably the most important, is like, if you're not already, take the recruitment process even more seriously. And I think that the comment there really is that US labor is very expensive. And I was sort of brought up and spent most of my early career reading books of the gods of Silicon Valley and things like that. And I put these folks on a pedestal. I think the average talent and the average sort of contributor in the US market is no better, in my experience, than the UK or European equivalent. I would say that the very best talent in the US is way better, but don't make the mistake of paying for the very best talent and receiving the mediocre person that's as good as what you're getting at half the price in Europe. Make sure that you really, if you're going to pay US expectations, you get US quality. And we certainly got that wrong early. And I think we've learned how to do that properly now.
Awesome. That's great advice. Thanks, Tom. Really appreciate you taking the time for this.
No worries.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for your partnership. It's just awesome seeing what you're achieving there at Pinpoint. So thank you.
Thanks, Zoe. Thanks for the partnership as well. Fantastic. All the best.